In a brutal clash between the White Tower's elite mages and a united demonic force, humanity stood on the edge of extinction. Leading the invasion was the High Priest of Extinction, commanding an army powerful enough to threaten the entire world. Standing against them was Oscar Sage, a level 9 mage and master of the White Tower. Fighting alongside his disciples, Oscar managed to stop the invasion and defeat the enemy. But victory came at a terrible cost. A massive hole pierced through his chest as blood slowly spread beneath him. With what little strength he had left, Oscar cast one final detection spell, desperately searching for any remaining signs of life. Nothing. No response. No survivors nearby. Everyone was gone. He was completely alone, and he wouldn't be alive for much longer. At that moment, Edna Solar appeared. The last dragon. The observer of history. She had come to assess the damage left behind by the war. According to her report, 132 level 6 mages, 19 level 7 mages, and 2 level 8 mages had fallen in battle. The White Tower had been reduced to ruins, and countless years of magical research had been lost forever. But there was one piece of good news. Imperial forces had arrived earlier than expected and managed to rescue a handful of survivors, including Oscar Sage's personal disciples. Hearing that, Oscar finally felt relieved. With his final breath, he asked Edna Solar to protect them. Because he trusted her, the dragon lowered her head in agreement. Amused by the sight, Oscar joked about a dragon being bound to a human's request. Edna Solar simply replied that he had earned that right. At exactly 3:47 p.m. on April 28th, Oscar Sage passed away. History would remember him as one of the greatest mages to ever live. Yet despite all his accomplishments, he died with a single regret. He never believed he had been a good leader for his people. If he were ever given another chance, he swore he would live differently. He would live selfishly for the sake of his people. A foolish wish. An impossible wish. And yet, against all logic, it came true. 20 years later, Oscar Sage opened his eyes. But he wasn't in his own body. A falling leaf brushed against his skin, causing him to jolt upright. The sudden movement sent his hand flying straight into the face of the man beside him. Water splashed everywhere. Frank, his caretaker, immediately started yelling. After taking care of him all this time, this was the thanks he got? All he wanted to do was change a towel. He complained that Oscar Crushing's reckless sleeping habits would be the death of him and that a little gratitude wouldn't hurt. But Oscar Sage barely heard a word. His mind was racing. Why was he alive? The last thing he remembered was dying after being skewered by the High Priest of Extinction. Before he could process what was happening, the door suddenly burst open. Elder Maxim stormed inside without even bothering to knock. Frank tried to calm him down, but Elder Maxim wasn't interested in listening. He loudly declared that it was finally time to turn Oscar Crucian into a proper human being before calling him completely pathetic. Still trying to understand the situation, Oscar Sage asked the question that mattered most. How was he alive? Elder Maxim laughed. To him, it sounded like Oscar Crucian had only just realized he was the kind of cockroach that somehow always found a way to survive. Ignoring the insult, Oscar Sage's attention shifted toward their robes. And the moment he saw them, he realized something was very wrong. The robes they were wearing immediately caught Oscar Sage's attention. These were White Tower mage robes. He demanded an explanation. Unfortunately, that was the worst thing he could have said. Elder Maxim's face instantly darkened with rage. Without warning, he raised his hand, preparing to slap Oscar Crucian so hard he would see next week before the rest of the world did. Acting on pure instinct, Oscar Sage cast a windshield spell. Even in his weakened state, he was confident the barrier would shatter Elder Maxim's wrist before the slap could land. But the moment the spell formed, something was wrong. The magical barrier flickered, then vanished. It collapsed before Elder Maxim's hand even reached it. Oscar Sage's heart sank. His magic was weak. Way too weak. Still, the incomplete spell was enough to make Elder Maxim stop. To Oscar's surprise, the old mage actually looked pleased. He remarked that Oscar Crucian hadn't been completely lazy after all. For now, he would postpone punishment for embezzling research funds. After delivering that warning, Elder Maxim turned around and stormed out of the room. Frank, who was still soaked from earlier, couldn't believe what had just happened. If Oscar Crucian had said one more wrong thing, he would have been flattened. But Oscar Sage wasn't paying attention. His mind was focused on something far more important. What happened to his magic? After inspecting himself, he quickly found the problem. His mana circuits were in terrible condition. His mana reserves were pathetic. Even the purity of his mana was garbage. Nothing about this body resembled the power he once possessed. Needing answers, he asked Frank what day it was. Annoyed, Frank replied that it was September 21st. Oscar Sage froze. September 21st? That meant he had been unconscious for 5 entire months. But Frank immediately corrected him. No, he had only been asleep for one day. Somehow, that answer was even worse. Trying to confirm his suspicions, Oscar ordered Frank to summon Lloyd Schultz. And if Lloyd wasn't available, then bring healer Shasha instead. Frank stared at him like he had gone insane. Apparently, those names belonged to mages whose stories were already part of history. Lloyd Schultz had left the White Tower long ago and joined the Red Tower. As for the missing spell books, he was blamed for losing them. Only Shasha remained, and she was now the White Tower master. Oscar Sage immediately rejected everything he had just heard. There was no way any of that could be true. Yet Frank sounded completely sincere. For the first time, doubt crept into Oscar's mind. He demanded an explanation. How could Shasha possibly be the White Tower master? When he died, she had only been 5 years old. Frank sighed before correcting him again. Shasha wasn't 5 anymore. She was 25. And at that moment, reality finally hit him. Oscar Sage slowly looked toward the nearby window. A stranger stared back. The reflection wasn't his own. The body wasn't his own. He wasn't Oscar Sage anymore. He had somehow been thrown 20 years into the future. And during those 20 years, the world had completely transformed. Electricity, automobiles, advanced magic engineering. Civilization had advanced far beyond anything he remembered. It was the kind of future his old comrades would have been amazed to see. Humanity had survived. And from the ashes of despair, something extraordinary had been built. After calming himself down, Oscar began investigating the body he now occupied. Its owner was Oscar Crucian, 20 years old, a fallen noble's son, accepted into the White Tower at the age of 10. A level 1 mage with decent looks, but absolutely terrible magical talent. According to Frank, Oscar Crucian had recently embezzled funds to purchase an illegal elixir. His goal was simple: increase his mana. Unfortunately, the experiment ended in disaster. The moment he drank it, he collapsed. Frank insisted he had only been unconscious for a day, but based on the amount consumed, Oscar Sage believed the young man should have died on the spot. Curious, he examined the body more carefully, and what he found was strange. Extremely strange. Despite being only a level 1 mage, Oscar Crucian possessed an abnormally large amount of pure, unrefined mana, far more than someone at his level should ever have. Then something even stranger happened. Deep inside his chest, a black substance suddenly appeared. The disgusting sludge slowly crawled through his body. It moved down his arm, across his hand, and finally, a drop of black gunk fell from his fingertip. The moment the black substance touched the floor, it let out a faint hissing sound. Oscar Sage's eyes narrowed. It was poison, and suddenly, everything made sense. The illegal elixir had been real. It had worked. The problem was that it had also been laced with poison. Oscar Crucian hadn't died from mana overload. He had been murdered. Even worse, the amount of poison used was absurdly high. Far too much for a low-level mage. This wasn't an accident. Someone had wanted Oscar Crucian dead, and they wanted to make absolutely sure he stayed that way. Oscar Sage didn't know who was behind it. He didn't know why they targeted him. But one thing was certain. He had been given the second chance he once begged for. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. He would live selfishly for his people, just as he had promised before his death. At the same time, he owed the original owner of this body a debt he intended to repay with interest. And that interest was called vengeance. Meanwhile, trouble was already brewing elsewhere. Part of the city had been destroyed by a rogue mage, throwing the Gordon family into chaos. The head of the Gordon family was furious. He shouted at one of his servants, demanding to know who had attacked his store. The servant hesitated before finally revealing the culprit: Oscar Crucian. The boss immediately dismissed the idea. There was no way a pathetic level 1 mage could defeat his guards. It was impossible, unless the elixir had actually worked. The servant nervously pointed out another problem. If the White Tower discovered what happened, they would both be finished. But surprisingly, the boss wasn't worried. He had seen the poison ring worn by the person who ordered Oscar Crucian's death, and that person was a White Tower mage. In other words, they had powerful allies. Then both men suddenly froze. A cold silence filled the room. Standing right in front of them was Oscar Sage. He had heard everything. Using the lingering scent left behind on the elixir bottle, he had traced it directly to this location. Now that he knew more about the situation, Oscar realized the conspiracy ran far deeper than he originally thought. But that only made him more determined to uncover the truth. The boss quickly recovered and tried to assert control. He demanded to know whether Oscar Sage was responsible for destroying his store. Oscar didn't even bother denying it. He calmly admitted everything. Then, with complete confidence, he told them to continue their conversation. After all, he was very interested in hearing the rest. The boss's face twisted with rage. Any thoughts of letting Oscar leave disappeared instantly. He barked an order to his subordinate. Kill him. The acting head grinned and rushed forward without hesitation. Oscar Sage casually raised one hand. Wind cutter. A razor-sharp blade of compressed air shot forward. In an instant, it sliced cleanly across the man's throat. The attacker collapsed before he even understood what happened. As the body hit the floor, Oscar was reminded of the day he killed the High Priest of Extinction. For a brief moment, old memories resurfaced. Then reality returned. The boss had completely lost his composure. Panicking, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. Oddly enough, Oscar looked more curious than concerned. This was his first time seeing such a weapon. A tiny device capable of producing devastating force without using a single trace of mana. Fascinating. He cast Wind Shield. The incoming bullet suddenly stopped in midair. The boss's eyes widened in disbelief. Then Oscar flicked his finger. The flow of wind reversed. The bullet spun around and shot back toward its owner. Several rounds tore through the boss's body. He collapsed instantly. As the man's life faded away, Oscar calmly informed him that nobody was coming to help. Because from the very beginning, no sound had been allowed to escape the room. The boss stared at Oscar Sage in disbelief. How could a level 1 mage cast a silent spell? Oscar calmly corrected him. It wasn't a silent spell. It was soundbind. Unlike a silent spell, soundbind didn't erase sound. It simply prevented sound from escaping the area. With the explanation out of the way, Oscar got straight to the point. He wanted answers. Who ordered the assassination? The boss clenched his jaw and refused to speak. Oscar responded with a brutal kick that sent him crashing across the floor. Looking down at the injured man, Oscar realized something. He valued his pride more than his pain. Unfortunately for him, that wasn't going to save his life. Oscar raised his hand and infused the man's body with wind mana. Tiny blades of compressed wind formed inside him, slicing through his flesh from within. The boss immediately collapsed, screaming in agony as invisible blades tore him apart. The torture didn't last long. Eventually, he broke. Begging for mercy, he promised to tell Oscar everything. Satisfied, Oscar released the spell. The boss confessed that a hooded man named Neil Breen had approached them with the illegal elixir and a large sum of money. Their only job was to sell it to Oscar Crucian at an unbelievably cheap price. They accepted because refusing wasn't an option. According to the boss, Neil Breen wore a White Tower ring. But Oscar wasn't convinced. That sounded more like someone trying to frame the White Tower than an actual member. Instead of focusing on appearances, Oscar asked something unexpected. What did he smell like? The boss blinked before answering. A crisp, minty scent. It was so distinct that he would never forget it. Oscar silently memorized the detail. It might become important later. His next question was even more interesting. After poisoning a White Tower mage, how exactly were they planning to avoid the consequences? The boss simply shrugged. The White Tower was currently too busy dealing with its withdrawal from the 4 main towers. They barely had time to investigate crimes like this. That immediately caught Oscar's attention. He demanded more information. The boss looked confused. How could someone from the White Tower not know something so basic? Thinking quickly, Oscar blamed it on memory loss caused by the elixir. The excuse was believable enough. The boss handed over several documents explaining the current state of the world. Oscar quickly flipped through them. One page stood out immediately. April 28th had officially been declared White Knight Day, a holiday honoring Oscar Sage's sacrifice and the defeat of the High Priest of Extinction. As a reward for their victory, the Emperor granted the White Tower a 30-year tax exemption. It should have been the beginning of a golden age. Instead, the documents painted a completely different picture. Even after 20 years, the White Tower had never truly recovered from the war. In fact, it had produced the worst results among the 4 main towers the previous year. Oscar couldn't believe what he was reading. Before his death, he had personally entrusted Edna Solar with documents that were supposed to prevent exactly this outcome. So what went wrong? Oscar silently made a mental note to investigate later. He turned to the final pages. They listed the businesses operated by each of the 4 main towers. Curious, Oscar asked the boss to explain them. The boss happily obliged. The Yellow Tower of the East mastered lightning magic and led the magic engineering revolution. They created inventions like magical street lamps and even vehicles. The Blue Tower of the South dominated the potion industry while expanding into agriculture and clean water distribution. The Red Tower, based in the desert, worked alongside the military and specialized in monster subjugation. Oscar nodded. Those all made perfect sense. Then he asked about the White Tower. The boss answered without hesitation. They deliver mail. Oscar froze. The once great White Tower, the tower that had stood at the forefront of magical research, had become a postal service. Their wind riders now flew around delivering letters like carrier birds. Oscar Sage was completely speechless. The boss tried to defend the White Tower's new role. Their Wind Riders could travel faster and more safely than anyone else, giving them a huge advantage in logistics. But to Oscar Sage, it was nothing short of disgraceful. The White Tower had once symbolized freedom. Like dragons soaring across the sky, its mages were pioneers who pushed magic beyond its limits. Now, they were glorified delivery workers. Oscar could barely believe it. He demanded to know who had approved such a humiliating direction for the tower. The answer hit him harder than any attack. Shasha, his own disciple, the current White Tower master. For a moment, Oscar was speechless. He didn't know which hurt more, seeing his life's legacy reduced to this, or realizing he had personally trained the one responsible. Pushing aside his disappointment, Oscar shifted the conversation. He asked about the Blue Tower's unusual businesses. Selling water? Managing agriculture? How did that even make sense? The boss explained that the Blue Tower used magic to control rainfall in drought-stricken regions. They also purified water and sold it as a luxury product. According to him, wealthy nobles couldn't get enough of it. Oscar found the idea ridiculous. Water was free. People could dig wells. Who would actually pay premium prices just to drink purified water? Apparently, 20 years had changed more than just magic. It had changed people's priorities too. By now, the truth was impossible to ignore. While the other towers had expanded into powerful industries and built enormous empires, the White Tower had been left struggling just to survive. And with the White Night Festival only 7 months away, this might be their final chance to prove they still deserve their place among the 4 main towers. The shop owner lay trembling on the floor. Blood continued to pour from his wounds. His body had gone cold. Death was quickly approaching. Oscar Sage paused. The man had answered every question. Did that earn him a second chance? Before making his decision, Oscar picked up the shop's ledger. As he turned the pages, his expression grew colder. Arson, assault, illegal loans, extortion, contract killings. Every crime the man had ever committed had been carefully recorded in black ink. There wasn't a shred of innocence to be found. Closing the ledger, Oscar made his choice. Without saying another word, he walked to the edge of the building and jumped, leaving the man behind to face the consequences of his own actions. Perhaps, if there was justice in the next life, he would return as a better person. Later that night, Oscar Sage returned to the White Tower. His body felt completely drained. Casting only a handful of basic spells had exhausted him, as if he had run an entire marathon. It was both embarrassing and deeply concerning. If this body struggled with low-level magic, how could it ever withstand the Wind Archive magic that had made him legendary? He decided to test it anyway. Nothing happened. The spell disappeared the instant he cast it. No effect. No response. It simply failed. Oscar frowned. Clearly, he needed to understand this body before attempting anything more. His first step was a complete body scan. While the spell analyzed his condition, he picked up Oscar Crucian's profile book. If he wanted to survive in this new life, he first needed to understand the life he had inherited. The records revealed that Oscar Crucian had once been the heir of Count Crucian. He was also the sole survivor of a devastating fire that destroyed his family's mansion. From an early age, he had been praised as a once-in-a-generation genius. At the Empire Academy, he earned the highest grades. He even published a groundbreaking thesis that attracted attention from every major faction. Everyone wanted to recruit him. Everyone believed he had a brilliant future ahead of him. But then, everything came to a sudden halt. Despite all his intelligence, despite all his talent, Oscar Crucian never advanced beyond level 1. Oscar Sage soon discovered the truth. Oscar Crucian had been diagnosed with mana deficiency syndrome. At first, everything seemed to make sense. The boy had extraordinary intelligence, but no way to turn that talent into real power. A brilliant mind trapped inside a broken body. Then the results of the body scan appeared. Oscar's expression immediately changed. The diagnosis was wrong. This wasn't mana deficiency syndrome at all. Someone had deliberately sealed Oscar Crucian's mana circuits. Mana deficiency syndrome meant a person was born unable to properly store or circulate mana. Normally, every mage developed up to 20 physical circuits connected to their mana core, and those circuits determined how far they could advance. If the foundation was damaged, no amount of training could push someone beyond level 3. But Oscar Crucian's foundation wasn't damaged. It had been restrained, bound, locked away by someone else's hand. This wasn't a disability. It was sabotage. Oscar's eyes narrowed. Someone had done this on purpose. Then another thought crossed his mind. Had Oscar Crucian known all along? If he was truly as brilliant as his records claimed, there was no way he hadn't figured it out. Maybe that was why he spent years pretending to be a useless drunk. Not because he had given up, but because acting broken was the safest way to stay alive. If his enemies believed he was harmless, they would stop paying attention to him. Still, one question remained unanswered. If he already knew he was being targeted, why risk everything by buying an illegal elixir? Oscar let out a quiet sigh. The answer no longer mattered. Just as he had fought his way through a collapsing world 20 years ago, he would overcome this obstacle as well. And this time, he would untie the chains someone else had placed on this body. After all, there was no one else he could trust. To learn more about Oscar Crucian, he began reading through the books left behind in the room. Every page was packed with notes, theories, and magical research. One title immediately caught his attention: The Reinterpretation of Basic Magic. Curious, Oscar opened it. Before long, he found himself completely absorbed. The pages were filled with detailed spell analyses, rewritten formulas, and creative ideas for adapting basic magic to real-world situations. Oscar Crucian had even studied firearms, comparing their strengths and weaknesses against traditional magic. The deeper Oscar read, the more astonished he became. Many of these theories closely resembled techniques that Oscar himself had pioneered years ago. Alternative casting methods, multi-purpose spell structures, more efficient mana usage. Oscar Crucian had reached many of the same conclusions entirely on his own. Even more impressive, he had designed brand-new beginner-level spells purely as theoretical exercises, all without being able to properly cast magic himself. For someone who had spent his entire life unable to use his own talent, his determination was unbelievable. Then Oscar reached one final passage. A single sentence stopped him in his tracks. I only hope this book can carry a weak breeze toward the White Tower left behind by Oscar Sage as he faces his final challenge. Oscar quietly closed the book. For the first time, he truly understood the kind of life Oscar Crucian had lived. A lonely genius. Ignored. Misunderstood. Burdened by a secret no one else could see. Yet despite everything, he never stopped researching. He never stopped believing in magic. And he never abandoned the White Tower. Oscar's grip tightened around the book. A new determination filled his heart. He was the 17th master of the White Tower. He would break the seal that Oscar Crucian never had the chance to remove. And everyone responsible for stealing this young man's future would pay for it. Later that night, Oscar Sage found himself walking through a massive greenhouse. Flowers surrounded him in every direction. The air felt strangely peaceful. Confused, he looked around. Then it finally hit him. He was dreaming. The strain of trying to break the seal on his mana circuits had finally caught up to Oscar Sage. He had fallen asleep. Soon, a familiar voice echoed through the air. Oscar immediately realized what was happening. He was reliving another memory from his previous life. It was the dream curse. Long ago, the Viscount of Nightmares from the demon realm had cursed his soul. Every time Oscar fell asleep, he was forced to relive pieces of his past. He had hoped reincarnating into a new body would free him from it. Instead, he learned the curse wasn't tied to his body. It was tied to his soul. Still, there was one thing he didn't mind. He could see his old disciples again. The dream carried him back decades into the past. Standing before him were 3 children. Lloyd Schultz, only 9 years old, quiet, black-haired, and always serious. Shasha, 5 years old, bright, curious, and full of wonder. And Gilead Dominic, 7 years old, a golden-haired bundle of endless energy. Oscar stood before them as their teacher. Today's lesson was the 4 fundamental types of magic: enchantment, acceleration, balance, and special type. He explained that while many spells looked similar on the surface, every spell belonged to one of these categories based on its structure and purpose. The White Tower specialized in balance magic. And among all elements, wind magic was the perfect match for that affinity. Each tower had its own strengths. The Golden Tower pursued acceleration, focusing on speed above everything else. The Red Tower, deep within the desert, specialized in enchantment through fire magic. Meanwhile, both the Azure Tower and the White Tower excelled at balance magic. Gilead immediately raised his hand. He proudly declared that he wanted acceleration magic. Anything slow was a complete waste of time. Oscar chuckled. Affinity wasn't something you chose. It was something you were born with. A mage's job wasn't to pick an affinity. It was to discover the one they already possessed. Curious, Shasha asked how people found theirs. Oscar smiled. He drew a magic circle across the ground. Then he instructed her to place one finger on the glyph and cast the spell inside it. Although nervous, Shasha reached forward. The moment her finger touched the circle, mana gently shimmered around her hand. Steady, peaceful, perfectly controlled. Oscar recognized it immediately. Balance type. More specifically, a harmonization type. The same affinity he possessed himself. Shasha's face lit up with excitement. She couldn't stop smiling after learning she shared the same affinity as her master. Next was Gilead. The instant he activated the spell, his mana burst forward with incredible speed. Acceleration type. Exactly what he'd hoped for. The energetic boy practically jumped with excitement. Finally, it was Lloyd Schultz's turn. Instead of a surge of mana, a delicate flower bloomed before him. Oscar's eyes widened. Special type. One of the rarest affinities in existence. Only about 2 out of every 1,000 mages possessed it. Yet Lloyd looked disappointed. Quietly, he asked if there was any way to change it. Oscar couldn't help but smile. Special type was an incredible gift. So why reject it? Lloyd lowered his head before answering. He simply wanted to become more like his master. The innocent answer left Oscar both amused and deeply touched. He promised he'd look into it. Although, he had already decided to give Lloyd special training. The moment Lloyd heard those words, all of his worries disappeared. There was only one condition. He wanted a pinky promise. Oscar laughed. Even now, he remembered that day perfectly. There was a reason Lloyd Schultz eventually became known as the Promise Man. Suddenly, a loud announcement echoed through the tower. Oscar's eyes snapped open. The dream was over. The broadcast ordered Oscar Crucian to report to Lab 4202. As he walked through the White Tower, he reflected on his recent progress. He had successfully unlocked 12 physical circuits. Only 8 remained. Even his mana circuits had grown stronger. He had officially advanced to Level 2. Inside the laboratory, Elder Maxim was already waiting. He greeted Oscar Crucian before mentioning the rumors that his memories had returned. Oscar confirmed it. The answer seemed to genuinely please the old man. Back when Oscar Sage had been the Tower Master, Elder Maxim was only a junior mage. Now, at 45 years old, he had become one of the White Tower's elders. Oscar remembered him well. Honest, hardworking, and always following him around while respectfully calling him senior. Without realizing it, Oscar smiled. Elder Maxim noticed, but chose not to comment. Instead, he got straight to business. He brought up the deaths of the Gordon family's boss and acting head. Did Oscar Crucian know anything about it? Oscar answered calmly. They had tried to kill him first. The poisoned elixir and the ledger recovered from their shop proved everything. Elder Maxim quickly understood. So that explained the assassination attempt. Oscar nodded. He admitted that he had killed both men while defending himself. The contract details were all recorded inside the ledger. After reviewing everything, Elder Maxim agreed. The incident would officially be treated as self-defense. He also promised to protect Oscar Crucian from any legal consequences. With that matter settled, Oscar made a request. He wanted to meet the current Tower Master. Shasha. Elder Maxim didn't object. After all, Oscar Crucian and Shasha had spoken quite often in the past. That caught Oscar off guard. He had no idea Oscar Crucian had been close to Shasha. Now he couldn't help but wonder. What had they talked about? Unfortunately, there was a problem. The earliest possible meeting would be 6 months from now during the White Night Festival. Shasha was currently away, filling in for an absent high mage on an important commission. Curious, Oscar asked about her current strength. Elder Maxim answered without hesitation. Level 7. Oscar quietly fell into thought. At Shasha's age, he had already reached level 9. Considering her natural talent, she should have become a level 8 mage by now. So what had held her back? Changing the subject, Elder Maxim mentioned another report. The investigators found it strange that the 2 corpses had been killed with such clean, precise wounds. He asked whether Oscar Crucian had secretly resumed practicing offensive magic. Oscar simply shrugged. I train whenever I feel like it. Satisfied enough, Elder Maxim dismissed him. After Oscar left, another figure stepped into the room. Vice Master Hamel Glimwitz. He gently advised Elder Maxim not to be too hard on Oscar Crucian. After all, he was the one who had personally brought the boy into the White Tower. Elder Maxim acknowledged the concern. Even so, he insisted that Oscar Crucian would still be held responsible if he caused trouble. But despite his strict attitude, there was one thing he couldn't deny. Oscar Crucian's recent progress was nothing short of remarkable. Mastering Windshield in just a few days wasn't something a normal level 2 mage should be capable of. To Hamel Glimwitz, it proved one thing. Oscar Crucian had been training harder than anyone realized. Satisfied with his progress, Hamel left to meet with Elder Fidenlina. Meanwhile, Oscar Sage wandered back into the White Tower's greenhouse. It was the very same greenhouse he had seen in his dreams. As he admired the plants, an elderly man approached and introduced himself as Wilter, the tower's facility manager. Oscar didn't recognize him, but Wilter recognized Oscar Crucian immediately. He mentioned the rumors about Oscar losing his memories and, after speaking with him, realized they were true. Oscar noticed something else. Wilter kept calling him young Sir Oscar. Curious, Oscar asked why. Wilter smiled. He explained that he had once served the previous Tower Master, Great Sir Oscar. Calling Oscar Crucian young Sir Oscar helped him distinguish between the two. Without thinking much of it, Oscar asked Wilter to stay by his side as someone he could talk to. The old caretaker smiled sadly. He appreciated the offer, but he wouldn't be around much longer. Over the years, Wilter had watched 3 different tower masters come and go. He had survived countless changes and outlived nearly everyone he once worked with. The only reason he stayed for so long was because of something the former Oscar Sage had once told him. Everyone in the White Tower matters. Be proud to call this place your home. Those words had stayed with him for decades. Oscar felt a lump form in his throat. He assured Wilter there was nothing foolish about believing those words. In fact, he was proud of Wilter's loyalty. But Wilter had already made his decision. The White Tower was falling apart. The buildings were deteriorating. The finances were even worse. Next month would mark his 40th year of service. Traditionally, employees who reached that milestone received a reward of 200,000 bells, enough to buy a modest house. But now, the White Tower couldn't even afford that. If they paid him, other mages would be forced to take dangerous commissions just to cover the cost. Wilter refused to become a burden. The White Tower had always been his home. He wanted to leave without hurting it any further. Hearing those words, Oscar Sage finally understood just how desperate the tower's situation had become. For years, he had looked down on the Azure Tower for focusing so heavily on business. Now, he realized how wrong he had been. The Azure Tower wasn't greedy. It was practical. It had built a stable future. Meanwhile, Oscar had earned glorious titles like Hero, humanity's savior. Yet none of those titles could even provide a retirement reward for a man who had faithfully served the tower for 40 years. What good were those honors now? Lost in frustration, Oscar clenched his fist so tightly that his nails dug into his own palm. Blood slowly dripped onto the ground. Wilter's voice snapped him back to reality. Quietly, Oscar asked one final question. How much time do you have left? Wilter answered without hesitation. 2 weeks. Oscar lowered his head. Then he made a promise. He would find a way to make enough money so that no one in the White Tower would ever have to leave because of financial problems again. Wilter said nothing. His silence spoke louder than words. Oscar had made a bold promise. The only problem, he had absolutely no idea how he was going to keep it. Teaching classes wouldn't be enough. Taking commissions wouldn't be enough. Especially not for a level 2 mage trying to save an entire tower. Oscar Sage quickly realized that taking commissions or teaching classes would never generate enough money to save the White Tower. He needed something far bigger, a real business, one capable of changing the tower's future forever. At first, he considered entering the potion industry. Then, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind, like lightning cutting through the darkness. He had it. He knew exactly what the White Tower needed. Meanwhile, inside the Vice Tower Master's office, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Elder Fidenlina was moments away from exploding. She was furious that Oscar Crucian's theft had been treated so lightly. Every calm response from Elder Maxim only made her angrier. To her, he kept brushing aside a serious crime. Eventually, she stormed right up to him. Pointing a finger in his face, she shouted that he opposed every suggestion she made, no matter how reasonable it was. Despite being respected senior elders, the two argued like children. Seeing the situation getting out of hand, Vice Tower Master Hamel Glimwit stepped in. He sided with Elder Maxim. Throwing Oscar Crucian into extreme isolation training would be excessive. It wasn't discipline. It was torture. Instead, Hamel proposed a financial punishment. Oscar would simply repay 3 times the amount he had embezzled. But Elder Fidenlina wasn't satisfied. The White Tower was running out of money. In her opinion, they had no choice but to sell their unused potion equipment. The profits would keep the tower alive for at least another 3 months. It was the only practical solution. Hamel immediately refused. The White Tower was sacred ground. Its future couldn't be sold away just to survive the present. His words were noble, but noble ideals didn't pay debts. Finally reaching her breaking point, Fidenlina shouted the question everyone had been avoiding. Do we even have a future left to protect? 20 years had passed since the war. The White Tower had only continued to decline. Waiting for a miracle now was simply foolish. Elder Maxim immediately scolded her for speaking so coldly. The Vice Tower Master remained silent until the office door suddenly opened. Oscar Crucian walked in. Ignoring the tense atmosphere, Oscar calmly announced that he had a business proposal. Naturally, Fidenlina was the first to object. She couldn't believe the same person who had stolen the tower's money now wanted to lecture them about business. Before she could finish yelling, Oscar simply ignored her and addressed the vice tower master instead. He brought up a recent report. The Vince estate had been placed under lockdown because of a dangerous flu outbreak. Hamill immediately understood. The Cadena flu, a deadly disease with no known cure. 20 years earlier, the White Tower had developed a vaccine. But when the tower fell during the war, the research was lost along with it. Oscar then revealed something even more surprising. Even the Blue Tower had failed to recreate the vaccine, which was exactly why he had come. His plan was simple. He would recreate the Cadena flu vaccine, sell it, corner the market, and use the profits to rebuild the White Tower into a powerhouse once again. The entire room fell silent. Then, Fit and Lena burst into laughter. To her, the idea was completely ridiculous. A 20-year-old level 2 mage was claiming he could accomplish what the greatest mages in the world had failed to do for 2 decades. She called him completely delusional. Oscar didn't even flinch. He simply looked back at her and answered with complete confidence. Geniuses don't follow the rules. They create them. That single sentence was the final straw. Elder Fit and Lena finally snapped. She exploded at Oscar Crucian, reminding everyone that he was the same selfish brat who had wasted the White Tower's money on an illegal elixir. According to her, someone who couldn't even manage his own finances had no right proposing a business plan. Before the argument could spiral further, Vice Tower Master Hamill Glimwitz stepped in. He silenced the room. As unbelievable as Oscar's proposal sounded, if it succeeded, it could save the entire White Tower. That possibility alone deserved respect. Reluctantly, Fit and Lena apologized. She bowed her head, but the resentment in her eyes never disappeared. Oscar Sage understood why. For the past 2 years, Oscar Crucian had done nothing to earn anyone's trust. His terrible reputation wasn't an accident. It was deserved. But Oscar Sage wasn't the same person anymore, and he had complete confidence that his plan would work. To prove the outbreak really was the Cadena flu, Oscar directed everyone's attention to the second page of the report. One detail immediately stood out. Archbishop Baldwin had suddenly changed his pilgrimage route. Originally, he was supposed to remain in one city for an entire month. Instead, he rushed through several major cities while completely avoiding the Vince estate. Oscar explained why that mattered. The Altar Order of Terra had 7 archbishops who followed a strict pilgrimage route to visit noble families and receive donations. Their schedule wasn't flexible. Skipping an estate without a good reason simply wasn't done. Even stranger, Soren was no longer a wealthy city. There was no logical reason to prioritize it over the Vince estate, unless something dangerous was waiting there. Elder Maxim suggested that Archbishop Baldwin might simply be delayed because of religious duties. Oscar immediately shook his head. The official route was fixed. Soren, Melbourne, Green Ale, then the Vince estate. The delays weren't random. They suggested that Baldwin already suspected the outbreak, and he was buying time. Oscar calmly laid out his conclusion. If the Cadena flu spread through the Vince estate, the Altar Order could easily claim it was divine punishment. That scandal would destroy Archbishop Baldwin's reputation. Any chance of becoming a cardinal would disappear overnight. Silence filled the room. Elder Maxim slowly nodded. The theory made perfect sense. Even Fit and Lena had to admit it. Oscar Crucian's analysis was surprisingly sharp. Vice Tower Master Hamill Glimwitz looked genuinely impressed. Unfortunately, there was still one major problem. The White Tower was broke. They simply couldn't afford to fund the project. After thinking it over, Hamill reached into his own pocket. He offered Oscar Crucian 13,000 bells, not as tower funding, but as a personal investment. Oscar's face immediately fell. It wasn't even close to enough money. Still, he sincerely thanked Hamill for believing in him. Later, inside the production chamber, Oscar rubbed his aching forehead. Time for Plan B. If the White Tower couldn't fund the vaccine, then someone else would. His new strategy was simple. Create a working sample. Sell it directly to Archbishop Baldwin. If Baldwin's promotion depended on stopping the Cadena flu, he would gladly pay whatever it cost. With a new goal in mind, Oscar rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Before attempting the vaccine, he started with a simple test. An energy drink. Not bad, they say a true master never loses their touch. Then finally, Frank had already gathered every premium ingredient Oscar requested. After inspecting everything, Oscar couldn't help but smile. The quality was excellent. Jokingly, He told Frank he should become a merchant instead. Frank smiled back, then casually admitted that was already his backup plan for when the White Tower finally went bankrupt. And that's the end of today's manhwa recap. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more recaps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.